Greetings, everyone. My name is Bridget Cabrera, she, her, hers, and I'm the Executive Director of Methodist Federation for Social Action. MFSA has been around for over 100 years, and we're a faith-based policy and organizing network. Our mission is to mobilize, lead, and sustain a progressive United Methodist movement, energizing people to be agents of God's justice, peace, and reconciliation. And we're so excited to continue to co-host this series of webinars with our partner, United Methodist for Kairos Response, UMKR. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge the land and the many lands that we are joining from, its history and all the being seen and unseen, known and unknown. And as we step into our work on our many lands, most of us as uninvited guests, we offer this work in the spirit of reparation, devoting ourselves to justice as we strive to uplift the legacy of this place and these places. We invite you to acknowledge the Indigenous land where you are joining from and type that in the chat. A few announcements concerning our call today. By participating in our webinars, we covenant together to co-create an equitable and brave space where we learn, engage, and grow in relationship together. We are recording this webinar, and so the recording will be shared in the coming days. And as you have questions, please type them in the chat box. You don't have to wait for the Q&A time to do that. You can do that at any time. And closed captioning is available. It's also automatically generated, so do know there'll be errors and spelling errors in that, but that is available. You can click some things at the bottom of your screen to access that. Our moderator today is Teresa Basile. Teresa is a member of UMKR Steering Committee and their Communications Director. She's a member of the board of FOSNA, Friends of Sabeel North America, and previously served on the steering committee of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. Teresa also serves on the leadership teams of MFSA and the California Pacific Conference and the Western Methodist Justice Movement, both of which mobilize United Methodists for action on a wide range of justice issues. Welcome, Teresa.
Thanks, Bridget. It's great to be here and great to see so many people here with us today. I'd like to tell you a little bit first about UMKR. United Methodist for Kairos Response is a movement of clergy and laity in the United Methodist Church, responding to the call to action from Palestinian Christians in the 2009 Kairos Palestine document. We educate and mobilize United Methodists in particular for boycott and divestment and sanctions campaigns for Palestinian rights, and we advocate for changes in governmental policy. So I'd like to introduce first our exceptional panel. I am wondering if we have all of our panel with us here. And I am going to check that just for a moment. Yes. Wonderful. Our first panelist is Ida Tuma-Sliman. She has been a Palestinian member of the Israeli Knesset since 2015, representing the Hadash Party. She is chair of the Knesset Standing Committee on Women and Gender Equality, and Ida is a leading activist for feminist causes and the founder and past head of the Arab feminist group Women Against Violence. Born in Nazareth, Tuma-Sliman was previously the editor-in-chief of the newspaper Ittihad. She is frequently featured in reporting by news outlets around the world. Ida has been one of the strongest voices representing the Palestinian community in Israel. And we were expecting today to welcome another strong voice for the Palestinian people, the attorney and political analyst Diana Buttu. But a situation arose in the last few days that made it impossible for her to be here with us. So we are extremely fortunate and very grateful that Omar Shakir of Human Rights Watch was able and willing to join us on such short notice. Welcome, Omar. Omar Shakir is the Israel and Palestine Director at Human Rights Watch, where he investigates human rights abuses in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. He was the lead author of their groundbreaking report in 2021, A Threshold Crossed, Israeli Authorities and the Crimes of Apartheid and Persecution, which has made a significant impact around the world. In other work he has done at HRW, Omar investigated human rights violations in Egypt. Previously, he worked at the Center for Constitutional Rights, where he focused on US counterterrorism policies, including representing Guantanamo Bay detainees. And we have with us Dov Baum, the director of the Economic Activism Program at American Friends Service Committee. Dov is an Israeli citizen who refused to do her mandatory service in the Israeli military. She is also a feminist activist and scholar who has taught about militarism and the global economy from a feminist perspective in Israeli and US universities. She co-founded Who Profits from the Occupation and the Coalition of Women for Peace in Israel. And she has been active with numerous groups in the Israeli anti-occupation and democracy movement, including Boycott from Within, Zochrot, and Women in Black. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. For everyone now, we are in a very special week, in the middle of it right now, and it is called Israeli Apartheid Week. It is an activity and an event happening around the world when supporters of Palestinian liberation are raising awareness about Israeli apartheid and building campaigns in support of Palestinian rights. And that's exactly what we're doing here with this event. It's ironic that at the same time as Israeli Apartheid Week is happening, we are continuing to see massive protests in Israel. Hundreds of thousands of people are on the streets there, protesting the plans to limit the power of the Israeli judiciary and weaken the checks and balances among the branches of government in Israel. Those protesters' concerns are being echoed in demonstrations here in the US and other places, and by many commentators, some government leaders in the US and in Europe. Prominent liberal supporters of Israel are themselves expressing alarm. And from all corners, we are hearing the same repeated concern again and again, that Israeli democracy is at risk, that we must come together to save Israeli democracy. But quite a few political analysts are also noting the problem with claiming democracy for a state that leading human rights organizations have named an apartheid state. So it's not surprising that many Palestinian Arab Israeli citizens have mixed feelings about the protests that are making headlines around the world. So Ida, I would like to turn to you first and ask you, as a member of the Israeli parliament and as a Palestinian Arab citizen of Israel, what are your views on the protests that are happening now, that are rocking Israel, and the concerns that we're hearing so much of in the press about this new governing coalition and their policies? Are you seeing a radical change from the past or an extension of it? What has the reality been for you in your lifetime? Your experience of democracy in
Teresa, I just got a message from Ida that she was cut off from the call and she will rejoin in a couple of minutes. She apologized.
Right. Okay, well, we will come back to her. And Dov, you are an Israeli citizen living now in the US, but certainly know a great deal about Israel, and Omar does as well. So I'm going to put those questions to you. What are your views of these so-called pro-democracy protests and of what we're seeing in the press around the world about the dangers to Israeli democracy? And either of you that would like to jump in, let me know. All right, Dov, go for it.
I live here in the United States, but I start the morning every morning with the news from Palestine, of course. And it's devastating. I mean, the increase in brutality and violence against Palestinians, both from the side of Israeli soldiers and the government and from Israeli settlers is heartbreaking. I think there are 83 people killed just in the last 3 months. And not to say anything about the hundreds of people who are arrested and injured and traumatized by these attacks. And at the same time, there are hundreds of thousands of people in the streets in Israel that I wish to join, who are calling for democracy for Jews, whatever that means. They are protesting a very severe change in government policies that is designed to take down the judiciary and to weaken the Supreme Court and allow the government, the very extreme right-wing government, to do whatever it wants in the Israeli regime structure, which is very scary. So I totally understand many of my friends who would not join these demonstrations, because these are big streams of thousands of Israeli flags and so much patriotism and such a focus on trying to regain some democracies that was never democracy for all. In other words, it was never democracy. I have very mixed feelings about it, because I really wish I could join.
Can you elaborate on what you just said, that it was never a democracy? Because that is our theme here. In the context of the subject of apartheid, whether or not it exists inside Israel, this call to protect democracy, what is your view of how much democracy has existed there, and how do you compare that to the apartheid charges?
I think before we go there, and we will go there, that is the heart of the matter, and I'm sure Omar is our expert to talk about that. I want to say that there's something. You asked about those demonstrations and the attack on the judiciary and this alleged coup that is going on right now in Israel with the wave of new legislation. I want to say that I am an Israeli Jew, and I'm also queer, and I do find it very scary. I'm worried about my own rights. So I don't want to belittle any of that. This is a real change in regime that is proposed and is rolling out. And there is a reason why hundreds of thousands of people are out in the streets. But it is also very scary that these demonstrations as a whole, not really everybody, but almost everybody there, which includes the main branch of Israeli society, the bar association is out in the streets. Former justices are speaking against it. You have major generals who are announcing very strong statements against it. So you have very mainstream, the backbone of the Zionist regime is out protesting against this political initiative. They're doing it for a good reason. I mean, there is a big, scary change that is being proposed. If anything similar, I would have proposed here in the United States. I'm sure all of us would have been out there in the streets protesting as well. But what is even more scary is that you have all these people protesting for democracy and against the potential loss of rights that about half of the people who live under the boot of the Israeli regime never enjoyed these rights. So it's scary because it shows a deep, deep blindness to where we live. What is this place that we live in? It is also potentially an opportunity to educate a lot more people who go out to the street with banners about democracy. It is an opportunity for us to ask them about democracy and say, if you want to live in democracy, doesn't it mean democracy for all? Doesn't it mean that half of the people who live under Israeli control should be allowed to vote? As simple as that. Should be allowed to protest as well. All protests in the occupied territories are illegal. Maybe they should be allowed to have some kind of freedom of speech, which they do not enjoy right now at all. So it is not surprising that when a state keeps so many millions of people under a totalitarian, brutal military regime, the same state structures will widen themselves, and that state control will leak into populations that didn't experience such restrictions before. And that is what is going on.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna turn this over to you now, Omar. You can or do not have to start with the same place of the protests, because that was really a framing for the larger question of does apartheid exist in reality, both inside Israel and in the occupied territories? So if you could address that to some degree, how do we identify that? How do we know where we're seeing apartheid? Because this is something you're quite the authority on, and if you're able to share any examples with us of where we are seeing the apartheid regime in the lives of Palestinians now, that would be helpful.
Sure. Let me maybe start with the discussion I had with Dov a little bit, say a few words about that, and then I can transition to that. So the first thing is to say, I think we as concerned citizens of the world should always have solidarity with any movement, whatever shape or form it takes, that's pushing for change and reform. And so I think that, there's an inherent solidarity with folks that are pushing back against efforts to consolidate power. And history is instructive in the sense that what can start as something with a limited horizon, can, with the course of time, demands can evolve. I mean, we've certainly seen that elsewhere in the region. And I think anyone who has an analysis about the protest doesn't take into account that it has many shades and flavors and differences and distinctions. But there are two different trends in the protest that are clear. There's certainly, a part of it that has a limited horizon that would be just fine with reversing the clock 3 months to how Israel was, December 15th under the Lapid-Bennett government. That is fine with the status quo that has prevailed for many years, not just vis-a-vis Palestinians, but even inside Israel. And there are many examples of that, the kind of insistence on the Israeli flag, the kind of reticence to have the Palestinian flag, etc. But on the other hand, there also are people making connections, including chants of, where were you in Hawara, among others. Now, how to weigh those two trends, I think maybe Ida would be a better place to advise us on that. But I would just say, that the battle does matter. On one hand, when it comes, the courts and the judiciary, when it comes to Palestinians, have far too often been a rubber stamp, signing off on settlement expansions, signing off on punitive home demolitions, use of force. You can go down the list. But at the same time, there is the very, very real ways in which things could get even worse. So I think there's that nuance that is so often missing in the conversation. By the way, Teresa, it's the same thing when we talk about the reality on the ground. Because on one hand, I will tell you that in many ways, the repression Palestinians face today is unprecedented, and in a lot of respects. Whether you look at the number of Palestinians being killed in the West Bank, the numbers held in administrative detention, the restrictions on Palestinian human rights organizations. But at the very same time, the difference is one of degree and not one of kind. So it's more intensity, but by the way, some of that intensity turned under Lapid-Bennett government, not under Netanyahu, and is now maybe being accelerated in some respects. So just to say my last point on the kind of government, you asked this question about democracy. And I think actually Hagai Elad, our friend who's the executive director of the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, answered that question clearly when he wrote several years ago that democracy is the rule of the people, not the rule of one people over another. And it's difficult to reconcile using a term like that, when the government we're talking about has for more than 55 years denied millions of Palestinians their basic civil and political rights, not to mention many other rights, basically on account of who they are, while providing those same rights to Jewish Israelis living in the same territory. So maybe I don't know if you want me to transition now, Teresa, to your question about apartheid. I don't know if Ida wanted to come in on the government first.
I think I may be mistaken, but it looks like we lost Ida again.
Okay.
So yes, by all means, go
Sure.
forward.
Yeah, so look, there's a lot we can say about apartheid, right? And we wrote a 213-page report on this. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. So maybe if I were to do it in short, maybe in 5 to 10 minutes, describe to you an answer to your question, I would start with the fact that there is a term under international law for severe discriminatory oppression, right? And that term is apartheid. So while many of us, we hear apartheid and we think South Africa, international treaties, including the International Covenant on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, define apartheid as a universal legal term. It's a term to denote a specific kind of conduct that's not captured by other prohibitions. It's also a crime against humanity, defined under a convention from the 1970s, specific to apartheid that dozens of states have signed on to, and also defined under the 1998 Rome Statute to the International Criminal Court. So apartheid as a crime, if I were to summarize what it means in 30 seconds, it basically means severe abuses, what are known as inhumane acts, when they take place in a context of systematic oppression by one group of people over another, and when those acts are committed with the intent to maintain the system of domination. So to summarize, you need inhumane acts, systematic oppression, and an intent to dominate. So Human Rights Watch spent many years looking at how Israel treats Palestinians. We did case studies. We looked at statistics we'd compiled over 30 years. We looked at the work of other human rights organizations. We then applied the facts to the law that I just mentioned, and we determined that Israeli authorities are committing the crime against humanity of apartheid, as well as another crime against humanity, persecution against Palestinians. And we found that, again, in short, I would say by concluding first, that the Israeli government has pursued a policy or an intent to maintain the domination by Jewish Israelis over Palestinians, in essence, by pursuing a policy that is fundamentally motivated by the desire to maximize demographic control by Jewish Israelis, and minimize Palestinians, and then maximize the land that Jewish Israelis have, while confining Palestinians to smaller and smaller enclaves. The maxim often used is maximum land, minimum Palestinians. Now, this policy looks different in different areas, right? From parts of Israel where there's a formal policy of Judaization of the Negev and the Galilee, areas that encompass 2/3 the land in Israel and much of the Palestinian population, to the explicit policy in Jerusalem to, quote, maintain a solid Jewish majority in the municipality, which includes occupied East Jerusalem, and similar in the West Bank and Gaza, but we've documented that intent. So that's the first part of the analysis. The second part is we've concluded that there is systematic oppression of Palestinians by the Israeli government. Again, that takes different forms. In the West Bank, the Israeli government imposes dual legal regimes. So Jewish Israeli settlers who are living in settlements which are violations of the Fourth Geneva Conventions, are war crimes, are governed under civil law, while Palestinians are governed under draconian military law. So people who commit the same crime are tried in different courts, receive different sentences, different due process rights. There's also enforced segregation. Similar dynamics in East Jerusalem, despite Israeli annexation, including different legal statuses for Palestinians and Jewish Israelis, for the most part, Palestinians being stateless residents and Jewish Israelis being citizens. In Gaza, you have a almost 16-year policy where the movement of people out of Gaza and into Gaza is effectively prohibited. Nobody in, nobody out for everybody, unless you fall within a very narrow band of exemptions, sweeping restrictions on the movement of goods. All of these policies amounting to systematic oppression. And the final element of the analysis that I'll just mention is what we call inhumane acts. really severe abuses of the rights of Palestinians. There are many examples. We focused on 5 in the report. One are the movement restrictions, not just of Gaza, but the permit regime in the West Bank. That means Palestinians need difficult to obtain permits to enter East Jerusalem or much of the West Bank, while the majority of people, for example, on this call could get on a plane, go to the West Bank, without it. It also talks about the checkpoints that exist that can turn a short commute into a humiliating hours-long ordeal, as well as the separation barrier built on Palestinian land. So that's one. I'll just mention the last one, and I'll wrap up. The second is the policies, the coercive policies that make it effectively impossible for Palestinians to build homes and the majority of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Palestinians who receive more demolition orders than building permits, and the demolitions that result as a result, forcing Palestinians to leave their homes. There's also the confiscation, expropriation of Palestinian land, more than 2 million dunams, 1/3 of the West Bank, largely given to Jewish Israeli settlers, and that reduced Palestinians to living in dozens of disconnected enclaves. There's also the sweeping restrictions on the civil rights of Palestinians that I mentioned before, the right to assembly, expression, association, and finally, the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Palestinians that have lost their right to reside in their homes, especially in the West Bank and Gaza, but even inside Israel, because they were abroad for too long or because they weren't there when the occupation began, and for other reasons. Putting this all together, Human Rights Watch concluded that the Israeli authorities are committing apartheid against Palestinians.
That was extraordinary. Thank you, Omar. I've never heard quite so comprehensive and succinct a presentation on this subject. I am going to, rather than do a follow-up, there was so much meat in there. I'm going to turn now to Ida, and thank you, Ida, so much for hanging in there and coming back again and again. We're glad that you made it here. I know it was difficult for you to get to be with us today on Zoom. I'd like to ask you now a question that might pull together what we've been hearing from the others, although I know you haven't been able to hear it. We started off talking about the current protests in Israel and what many of us in the West are reading in the press and from political analysts, commentators, great concerns about the need to save Israeli democracy. And we're looking at this in the context of the considerable reports that have come out for the last 2 years and previously about the Israeli apartheid regime that exists, according to some reports, in both Israel itself and in the occupied territories. Now, putting those two together, we might have a contradiction in terms there. So can you comment on that from your experience, both as a member of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and as a woman, a Palestinian citizen of Israel who's grown up in Israel? What is your experience of Israeli democracy, and what are your thoughts about these charges of Israeli apartheid, apartheid existing inside Israel?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me and inviting me to join you. Actually, I'm really sorry because I was a little bit late. This day is a legislation day in the Knesset, and I had to also be in an event in Ramallah. And it is one of those days where the opposition or the protest groups have declared as a day of disruption of the everyday life. So we had to be stuck in the roads, which is okay with me. Let them disturb and disrupt the situation. Anyway, thank you. And Omar, I'm happy to listen to you again and again. I have to say that as a Palestinian citizen of Israel and as an MK, it always has been, I'm supposed to be the evidence that there is no apartheid in Israel. just by saying I'm Palestinian, citizen of Israel, I'm representing my community and the Jewish democratic forces in the Israeli parliament. That should be like denying any possibility of accusing Israel as an apartheid, which is used usually by the Israeli government or even some of those who are sitting in the opposition today, but do not differ very much from their ideas of the coalition or the government. This is not true. I think that Omar has, and the report they wrote in Human Rights Watch and the international decisions, say it very clearly, apartheid is not being only, is not about being able to elect or to be elected. This is not the definition of not having an apartheid. The everyday life, all my life, I've been experiencing policies of discrimination, policies of rejection from the Israeli authorities and governments. We've been oppressed for many years. Nobody, maybe some of you don't know that we lived under a military regime up till 1965. That's true that that regime ended at that time. Life used to look very much similar to what is going on now in the West Bank, but it doesn't mean that we lived in a real democracy. More even, in the last few years, we have been experiencing a deterioration, especially since the Jewish nation state law, which in my opinion is a marking point in the or a turning point in the way of how Israel is identifying itself clearly even to the world. Israel, the law says, which is a basic law, should be part of the constitution to be, if ever there will be a constitution. It depends if they decide to clear and put it on paper, where are the borders of Israel? And this is an issue that is, in my opinion, one of the most problematic issues today in Israel, because the real struggle that is going on, in my opinion, it's not about the judicial system. Attacking the judicial system is only a tool in the hand of the ultra-right-wing forces that are sitting in the government in order to change the whole identity of the state, in order to reach their dream of the greater Israel land. And if you read the Jewish nation state law, it starts with the greater Israel land is the homeland of the Jewish people. This is the main idea behind the policy that is led by this government now. For the first time in the last 20-25 years, the ultra right-wing, very religious Zionist groups reached the government. They are sitting in the government, and only the right wing is sitting in the government. For the first time in 25 years, maybe, we have only right-wing parties sitting in the Israeli government. It's not right-wing. For me, you have to understand, part of those who are sitting in the opposition for me are right-wing. But we are talking about a government that Netanyahu is supposed to be a center, if you compare it to the other components of the government. These groups have a window of opportunity to reach their dream of the greater Israel land as a homeland of the Jewish people. It means they are not thinking anymore, and they are planning to conquer back all the areas of the West Bank and even Gaza. You won't believe it, but they are willing to do any crime that you can think about, including what happened in Hawara 2 weeks ago, including what is happening every day on the ground by settlers attacking Palestinians, and accompanied by the Israeli army. You should understand, yani, settlers do not go by themselves alone to attack in villages, in Palestinian villages. They are doing this accompanied by the Israeli army, protected by the Israeli army, including transfer, like it's going to happen, for my regret, if the world do not wake up, in Khan al-Ahmar and in Msafir Yatta. Why I'm saying this? Because the same policies and crimes that they want to do and to implement, they are willing to implement inside Israel toward any of us as Palestinian citizens. Look what's happening in the Negev. And I'm not, you know, in the past when we used to say these words, people used to take it as, you know, part of our fears. This is what we are fearing of. This is what we, maybe a conspiracy theory that we have in our mind. But anybody who wants to understand why these reforms are happening should read the coalition agreements that were signed by Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu, all of those guys. The agreements say clearly what I'm saying, that it might happen, the crimes. When they are saying very clearly that the demographic balance in the Negev and in the Galilee should be kept as a vast majority of Jewish. And we know that in these two areas, there is almost 50-50 or more than 50% in the Galilee who are Palestinians. You can understand that the settlers' way of thinking is controlling also how they are going to relate to us, even if we are citizens. They are willing to transfer Bedouin villages in the south, and they want to concentrate them in small areas and to take over the land. Isn't that the plan also for the Palestinians in the beyond the green line? This is the same plan. This is the same way of thinking. Part of the laws that are introduced, you know, last Monday, what we voted on in the Knesset, I mean, we were against, but the law was to cancel the disengagement plan law, the bill. Disengagement plan was the plan of withdrawing the settlers from Gaza and from the north of the West Bank after Oslo agreements. Now they brought a bill, and it is not only voted on a primary reading, but also in a first reading already last Monday, to cancel the disengagement plan and to give an authority to Palestine, to Israeli citizens to be residents of north of West Bank. What does that mean? You know, these are looks like, why not? It's very simple language. It means getting back and building more settlements in north of West Bank, which is supposed to be Area A. So this is a very dangerous. We can see it by the different laws. One of the laws, why I'm saying it's going back only to close, that I said I'm supposed to be a witness or a testimony that Israel is not an apartheid because of being an MK. that might not happen in 2-3 years to come.
Mm.
You know that? First of all, because I might get sick of the situation and not be nominated, but this is not the problem. The problem is that now they have a bill introduced to the Knesset that, first of all, you know, people can be prohibited from running to an office in Israel if they practice incitement and racist positions, and if they have expressed support of terror. They want to cancel the reason or the excuse of being racist, as if they are saying you can be racist as much as you can. That will never avoid you of holding an office or being an MK. And on the other hand, there are the Supreme Court was very clear about, because usually they use supporting terror against us as Palestinians when they want to avoid us from running to the Knesset. They want now to change it, not those who are accusing you should be working hard to convince the court that you have been supporting terror for a long time and you expressed that publicly, and it's enough that you said one thing in your life that can be interpreted as supporting terror, you will not be allowed to run. And I'm telling you right now, just 2 months ago, there was a huge campaign against me because I named the young Palestinians who were killed when the Israeli army entered Nablus, because I called them martyrs, shuhada. This one word can be an excuse by the new bill not to allow me to run to the Knesset.
Yeah.
So this is not limiting our ability to be represented, and is not an attack on the right of political organization, then what is? So
Thank you. Ida, thank you very much. That is a fantastic overview of the many challenges that Palestinians are facing inside Israel and in the West Bank. The legal obstacles, the manipulation of the law, the day-to-day realities that you're facing there. And thank you, Omar, for that, for setting first for us the foundation of understanding what the structure of this is and how we understand from a legal point of view that everything that Ida was describing is in fact an apartheid system. I'm going to give you all one more moment to comment on what we've already been discussing and then segue to something that we can be doing about this, everything that we've been hearing about. So do others of you have comments on what Ida was sharing or other thoughts to share on this part of our conversation?
I just want to emphasize that what Ida says is so critical, because I think part of the problem is this tendency to view the situation as these two different realms, right? That there's, democratic Israel and there's the occupation, but in reality, there's one underlying government, there's one underlying system that rules between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And I think part of the conceptual shift here is not only the recognition that apartheid is the reality for Palestinians, but also is to understand the reality that the fundamental governing principle here between the Jordan River and Mediterranean Sea is that Jewish Israelis are privileged wherever they live. They're governed under one system with the same rights. They can move freely, whether they're settlers, whether they're in Israel proper, while Palestinians, wherever they live, are discriminated against and repressed at different degrees of intensity, so that there are differences, of course, in the treatment in different areas, but there is no square inch of land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean where Palestinians enjoy the same rights as Jewish Israelis. So the quicker we realize that apartheid is not a regional anachronism, it's not a specific thing of certain areas, but rather is at the foundation of the system of Israeli rule, the closer we are to a resolution.
Dove, do you have anything you want to add to that, or if not, that's fine, but if you would, please do.
I want to say this is really heartbreaking. I want to bring in the heart. I cannot imagine what it's like to be you, Ida, now with this barrage of legislation. It's like every day they make up new bills and new initiatives to just take away more of people's freedoms and people's ability to live their lives fully and with dignity. And it's heartbreaking. And it also feels overwhelming because what can we do? It is just this, the situation was so bad to begin with, and now it is getting worse. And Israel is enjoying so much international impunity, and we hear so little of all this in the news. And the world is full of so many other problems, and people are busy, and it's really, I just want to say it's really heartbreaking. And I also want to add that it is important for us to read those reports about apartheid, like the one written by Omar for Human Rights Watch, and to learn the language and know how to explain it to others. But beyond that, any of you who've ever visited Palestine, you know that the words are not necessary. You know, you see, you feel the injustice. You see the injustice, you feel the injustice, you want to do what you can to stop the injustice. Desmond Tutu visited and said this is worse than what we have suffered as Black Africans in South Africa. And that was many years ago, before these reports were.
That's a great segue, because bringing up Desmond Tutu and South Africa, you know, back when the world finally woke up to apartheid in South Africa, many people, whether they had ever even been there, became passionate enough that they felt they had to do something about it. And successfully, millions around the world came together to take all sorts of actions in their communities and with their governments to see that apartheid regime ended. And today that is possible, and there are people trying to come together and do that for what we've just been hearing described for the last 50 minutes that exists in Israel and Palestine. And one of those efforts is something very new, that an initiative that Dove is leading in a coalition, and that is the biggest thing, in fact, that we've come here to hear about today. So Dove, would you tell us about this justice initiative?
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. I think you're part of this coalition as well. So I just want to give credit where credit is due. Over the last few months, we've been meeting with members of faith organizations and other organizations, trying to create a coalition that will help us build an anti-apartheid movement in North America. This is really not, I wouldn't call it a campaign, I would call it more like a movement building initiative. And we call it Apartheid-Free Communities. The idea is to focus now on apartheid, not because it's the only thing that is going on in Palestine. It is not. We still want an end to the military occupation, and we recognize that this is settler colonialism. So it's really just that when you bring up the word apartheid here, I think in North America, people understand what needs to be done because they have the historical memory of South African apartheid. What do you do with apartheid? You cut your ties to apartheid. And the call from Palestinian civil society to us is always very minimalistic. Just stop supporting apartheid. What does it mean for us to stop supporting it? What does it mean for us to stop being part of the problem? So this is really new. We didn't even launch it publicly. So we're just trying to roll it out and see who would join us at this very preliminary stage. Let me share with you our website. You can find it on apartheid-free So I'll share my screen. Let's see if I can do that. Here it is, apartheid-free.org. It's brand new and it's still a little glitchy, and there are some sections of the website that we're still working on. My apologies. So this is something that is work in progress. There's some language here. We will put on some resources like the reports about apartheid. The main thing really here is the pledge. So I will roll down here. That's the pledge. And we are asking communities to sign the pledge, not individuals. So I know all of us would love to show our support just by signing something online. And I hope you do a lot of that, but this is not a petition for individuals. This is a pledge for communities. And I will say more about what kind of communities we are reaching out to. But first, let me just read it to you. There is a symbolic part for this pledge. We affirm our commitment to freedom, justice, and equality for the Palestinian people and all people. We oppose all forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, and oppression. And we declare ourselves an apartheid-free community. So this is the declaratory part of this pledge. And then there is also a pledge to take action. It is not a specific action that we are pledging to. And there will not be ever a descriptive idea of like, you have to do this or that, because we believe that different communities are really situated in different locations, geographically, as well as politically, as well as all sorts of other things. And the pledge is just to take action. It is not to take specific action, because we recognize that some communities, they need to educate ourselves and others about Israeli apartheid. In some communities, we can have some leverage with legislators, and maybe we can reach out to our representatives and ask them to do something. Now, there are many different types of actions we can take. But the pledge is to join others in working to end all support to Israel's apartheid regime, settler colonialism, and military occupation. What are we trying to achieve with this? At this stage, we really are trying to get more faith communities to sign on. It is okay if you get your, firm to sign on, your school to sign on, preferably your city to sign on, your state. Why not? Let's go for state. We can imagine. But really at this stage, we really want to see congregations and faith communities that can sign on, because we're building an ecumenical joint voice for Palestine and against Israeli apartheid. And it will help us create a network of congregations and faith organizations and denominations that can join joint actions, that can collaborate in taking on joint actions. So preferably think about the congregation that you're a member of and see what would it take to educate others and to get them to sign this pledge. Signing the pledge is a commitment to action, which means we will take all these groups that have signed the pledge and add them to a network of communities that will get information about new campaigns, will receive calls for joining different actions, and can decide what they want to do or not do about it. We will also share with all these signees a library of resources, videos that they can show, educational study guides, as well as lists of existing campaigns that they can join. So we are hoping to create all these joint resources that can help these communities organize. This is really the long haul. Many of us have been in this struggle for many years, and we know how hard it is to read the news every morning. And this is an attempt on our side to create something that is long-lasting, something that can grow and build over time into a more meaningful movement that, inshallah, we hope will have some kind of political impact and leverage.
Fantastic. That was a very comprehensive presentation. Thank you. I think even if I wasn't in the coalition, I would have a fairly good idea now of what we're trying to do here. But I'm wondering, how did that strike you, Omar and Ida? It's probably the first time you've heard this. So do you have some thoughts about this campaign now that you've heard about it? Ida?
Yes, well, first of all, Yani, it's really I'm trying. It looks like lack of sleep for many days is striking me now when I'm trying to find the words in English. So please be patient with me. I think it's a great idea. First of all, in order to make more people, before reaching the point where they commit themselves, at least understand what you're talking about. We are trying to explain the idea of apartheid. Israel has been very well sold to the world as the only democracy in the Middle East. And coming right away and saying that it is an apartheid regime, we are not only talking about occupation. To explain occupation has been somehow difficult. To add to this, that we are not only saying there is no democracy, we are saying that it is part of the DNA of the regime today is to practice apartheid. This is, I think, more difficult, and I know a little bit about the different, how in the United States look at the situation in the region. I think it's very brave to start such a campaign. But I have to say one thing. It's very important to invest for the long run change. But we are now under, in a crisis situation, in an emergency situation that I'm telling you. I say that the attack on the judicial system is only a tool to reach something. If they manage with this, it will be much more difficult to withdraw back or to change the situation for the better. So we need to hear the voices that are supporting what we are trying to face here now also, not only for the long run. I'm telling you, the fact that Smotrich couldn't find anyone to meet with him in the United States, if it wasn't so joyful to look at him at that point, it would have been, that kind of actions that to put pressure on your representatives in the Congress, to your Congress men and women, to tell them that they need to stand up and do something. We are not saying that they should leave everything in the United States and join us in the struggle here, but at least to have a clear position to make this government understand. And I'm telling you, as much as we want to think, Netanyahu is still a little bit sensitive to the international arena. There is a need to make them understand that the world will deal with them differently if they continue in this. And I think for this, we need actions that not only for the long run, but also here and now. And thank you, Dov, for your work.
Thank you, Ida. That was very helpful. And I forgot to mention to people long before this moment that we were planning to go past the hour for this webinar. We're going to 75 minutes in case anyone is wondering what is happening. So Omar, your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I know we want to get audience questions. And I would just say I think it's a brilliant campaign. I think we're in a moment of unprecedented challenges with this new government. I mean, let's be clear about that. But at the same time, there's a moment of unprecedented opportunity because the fig leaf is being lifted in a lot of ways. I mean, this government, as I think Ida mentioned, says in its guiding principles that the Jewish people have the exclusive right to the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, they're putting apartheid with bumper sticker on their forehead. So that with that comes challenges because the facts on the ground get worse and worse, and we need to be clear about that. But at the same time, it makes our effort to recognize the reality of apartheid a lot easier because I've been briefing dozens of governments since our report has been released, and I can tell you that I get almost no pushback ever on our analysis or how we apply it, but especially in the last couple of months, it's just been, nobody's really pushing back. And I think the bottom line is we need to coordinate better to take advantage of the opportunities and be able to deal with the challenges. And I love this campaign also because it focuses on what we share. There could be differences between different groups and strategies and approaches, but the pledge here is to take action, right? Because we all need to take action. And it can be a broad umbrella to organize people to organize around, but there might be differences in our analysis, but we all see it's apartheid. And that's, as Dov said, it's not to negate other narratives that are critically important, whether it's settler colonialism, occupation, they're all relevant and part of the picture. I mean, the law of occupation is a fact. Settler colonialism has been well written about and discussed by Palestinians and others. So I think there's something that's clarifying about the ask here. And so I'm glad to hear, and I look forward to hopefully working together on it.
Fantastic. We would welcome that, I know. All right, as you said, we are going to try and get to the audience questions now, and hopefully we'll have time for at least a small number of them. And I will tell anyone who's been contacting me directly in the chat, I have not been seeing those because I'm not following the chat while we're doing this. But the questions that have been sent to Methodist Federation for Social Action have been collected. And let me take a quick look. Well, this is a short and simple one. Can you more clearly state how, if Israel limits free speech? Someone like to, and I will ask that so we can get to as many questions as possible, that our answers be somewhat succinct for these questions.
I'm happy to take that one very quickly. I mean, in the West Bank, military orders are quite explicit. You get 10-year jail sentence if you if we gathered like this, more than 10 people without a permit, 10-year jail sentence. If you're part of a hostile organization, you could be subject to a multi-year jail sentence. That's freedom of association. If you carry a flag, if you engage in all sorts of different protected activities, that's all prohibited. In Israel proper, the laws, including occupied East Jerusalem, which is annexed, the legal regime has some distinctions, but we've seen, and maybe that's best left to Ida, but there are different ways in which the laws are interpreted. But in terms of the West Bank, that's the answer. I'll leave it for Ida and Israel proper.
Ida, limits to free speech? Oh, you're muted. You are muted. There you go. You're fine.
I'm fine now? Okay.
You are.
If you wanted to speak about limits of freedom of speech.
Yeah, that was ironic, yes.
Anyway, well, first of all, I have to say that things are changing rapidly in this issue. More and more legislations are taking over and trying to, there's a horrible law that's called anti-terror law, which is the terror law, which is almost everything that if you are accused that you've been doing this because you have intention of committing terror, that means immediately, even by publishing, we had people who been brought to court because of publishing a status on Facebook that included something. We just last week, there was an issue of a student who read a poet of Mahmoud Darwish in one of the events in Beersheba University, and she was brought into oh my God, I'm trying to find the word, a kind of a committee in the university, and she was punished for reading that poet, that including again the word shaheed, which is a martyr. And she had to go to the we had a big campaign supporting her, and then brought the university into the Supreme Court for doing these steps against the student. We can see it also, for example, in the universities. Now there are a lot of limitations. We can see how the academy is afraid to allow freedom of speech and political speech in the university because of they are afraid of the government, and they are putting their pressure on the students to stop them from these actions. People are followed and on the social media, and followed by the security and police and so on, and intelligence. If they are advertising a call for a protest, they are called and they are warned by the police for taking these actions. It has been, there were also cases where we discovered that some of the activists are followed not in a legal way, or they are tapping them, or they are following them in order to collect information about them, and in order to make them afraid of expressing themselves. You can see it also, the limitations of, we never spoke about it very clearly, but I can feel it, the atmosphere in the Knesset. They are going crazy when we are saying the word occupation. Even in our speeches, if we are saying occupation, there's a big, huge noise in the Knesset, and they start screaming at you that there is no occupation.
Yeah.
What is happening, this is not occupation. You are a terror supporter. They lead a big campaign against, for example, the Arab leadership, saying that we are terror supporters, that we are inside for bloodshedding of Jewish citizens. And I'm telling you, this is reaching the community also, and you can feel it. We can feel it when we are going around. We can feel it when people approach us and start cursing us or attacking us. So this is, even if it is not by law, the drastic, horrible law of terror is there, but now also trying to limit, for example, prohibit having the Palestinian flag in demonstrations. But these are
a number of other ways that it's being limited. Thank you. That was more than I realized, than I even knew was going on in terms of this, these limitations. And of course, there is, maybe someone mentioned this already and I missed it, but there is the prohibition on commemorating the Nakba. Another example. All right, I think that we are going to have time for just one more question. And this is going to be for Dov, about apartheid-free communities. If we approach a congregation, what does it look like in a logistical sense for that congregation to sign the pledge? Do they post it on their website, hang a poster in their church foyer? campaign now public so we can begin to activate and utilize the pledge. And besides those answers, which might be very short, Dove, can you say a little bit about what it might look like to bring your community, your congregation to that point of signing the pledge? What might some of the steps be? How can you get there?
Wow, this is lovely. This is so practical. So something for us to do. It depends, I think, on the congregation you work with. In many of the cases, it is sometimes a long process to bring other people along, you know. So it might be a process that can be planned for the next few weeks or month even, of starting an educational effort, bringing speakers, watching videos and films, and starting a conversation group, getting people to care and to ask questions and to clearly share their concerns. I think there's a lot of fear around talking about Palestine. This is our side of the restriction on free speech in the US. I think there is a lot of fear about saying the word Palestine in some areas. If your congregation has already done that and is already a congregation where people are familiar and caring, then there are all sorts of different ways in which you can bring this forth and get everybody to agree to sign the pledge. Signing the pledge is very simple. You just go on the website and you fill a little form, you click on join. But this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning, signing the pledge, because it is a commitment to take action. And what is that action? So we hope to have on the website soon, in a couple of weeks or so, a menu of possible actions. Yes, put posters. We are going to produce beautiful posters and hats and whatever. I know it will be wonderful. So you can put posters everywhere. That is great. But also think, what does it mean to be an apartheid-free community? Now, first of all, it is aspirational. We are not apartheid-free, even if we declare ourselves to be apartheid-free. So what does it mean to take on that aspiration when it comes to our role locally in our own communities? And what does it mean as citizens of the United States or Canada or whatever citizens you are? What does it mean as consumers? Maybe there are corporations that you have a relationship with as workers or as consumers or anything like that, or as investors that you can try to influence. We would like our denominations to also divest from Israeli apartheid. What does that look like? What does it mean in your own, I don't know, mutual fund investment, pension fund, whatever? There are a lot of questions. This is just the beginning. The thing is that taking a commitment like that is not new. We have all done that in the past, or else you wouldn't come to this call today. Yes, we have these commitments. We have made such commitments. This is an opportunity for us to make this commitment with others and create a platform for larger companies. So hopefully, people asked if this is already public. Yeah, the website is out, so it is public. We are not doing a big push to share it widely yet, because we want to share it widely when we have signatories. You know, we want to show that there are already many communities and congregations that have signed. So we're hoping to do a push for more publicity only in June. If your congregation is able to become one of the foundational communities that help sign the pledge in this next couple of months, because you're fortunate enough to be part of a very progressive community, that is fantastic. You know, we really welcome that. We want to see more congregations to sign on in the next couple of months. But even if not, there is a lot of work to be done to create it. Hopefully, we want to see hundreds of signatories, and we want to create that network to get all of our denominations to divest from Israeli apartheid. We want to create networks of action in Congress through that. It is absolutely necessary and absolutely urgent, as Ida said.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic, Dove. And I think, well, I think you covered everything they asked. I will just add myself that that idea that was raised in the question about, yes, posting it online would be fantastic. Part of the action can be proudly letting others know we have made this decision in our community and this is why we did it. Now join us. Dov, I'm wondering if we can give them, if you will do that in the chat, if they'd like to get in touch instead of going to a website, get in touch by email. Can you put in the chat the best email for people to use to ask questions about this initiative?
Sure, I'll do that.
Okay. And while you're doing that, I want to say thank you very much to all three of you for getting here in spite of all the obstacles we've had, the last minute notice for Omar and the great difficulties Ida was having. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise and your knowledge. This was a great conversation. And Bridget, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Thank you for having us.
Hey,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call and to our amazing speakers. We have heard a very clear call today to organize in our faith communities and join this movement. We'll put that link in the chat again, just so that everyone has it. It'll also be sent with the resources. That's great. And also, our series of webinars are all on YouTube. And so those are also great resources as you're, speaking to your congregation or Sunday school classes or people in your communities. That's a great resource to just share with folks. We'll put that in the chat as well. Everyone will be emailed the recording of the webinar today, along with the information for our next webinar. Our next webinar is coming up in May. It will be focused on the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, which is this year. Nakba is the Arabic word for catastrophe, and the Nakba refers to the ethnic cleansing of Palestine for the establishment of the state of Israel, a crime that continues today. The Nakba is the foundation of all that has happened in historic Palestine since the 1940s, and we hope you will join us in May for this important conversation. Again, you will receive more information about the next webinar. Thanks again for joining us.